Wait a second. All right. Well, thank you, James, for being today with us. It's a real honor to have you with us. Like we in OIDEL team, we recently found one of your papers, and since then, like we have started discussing, like, well, just for the audience. So to introduce James Stanfield, he's a lecturer at Newcastle University. He teaches on the future of learning, self-organized learning environments. He has a PhD on direct education. He has a lot and really good research from what we've been seeing on direct education. Um, and today, what we are here is to talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a topic that well, thank you, first of all, James, for being with us today. And today, as I was saying, as we introduced previously, we have had already a conversation with Professor George Haddad, and today we are having our second conversation with James Stanfield, with the idea to better understand parental rights and how they were drafted in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, James, I just want to start with a straightforward question. Can the right to education be exercised without acknowledging parental rights?
In my opinion, no. A simple answer.
A simple answer indeed. Yeah, tell us then. So yeah, it's interesting because at the national level, we can see and we can notice, and maybe even increasingly, that there are some tensions about parental rights in the field of education. Why in 1946 was so important to recognize explicitly the rights of parents in the Universal Declaration?
Yeah, so just to go back then, so I did my PhD about 20 years ago when I was working for Professor Tooley looking at low-cost private schools, fee paying, and a report by UNESCO came out saying that all schooling should be free, and so any kind of fees is an abuse of human rights. And we were sent this document by a member of parliament in the UK. They sent it to Professor Tooley, who said, I think you might have something to say about this. And so he passed it on to me. And obviously there was a real problem there, because if free education was supposed to be a fundamental right, then any kind of fee paying would appear to be an abuse of human rights. And so I began to look back at Article 26. And my initial surprise was, paragraph C, that paragraph C existed. And that, for someone who's kind of read around the subject a little bit, I didn't know it existed. And that was groundbreaking for me. In fact, that one statement that parents have a prime right to choose. And so that was, amazing for me to find that there. And so I went back and I had to go down, this is 20 years ago. So I had to go down to the British Library and go through all the debates and discussions and through the minutes of the debates in the United Nations in 1946, 1946, 7, or 1947, 1948, around it. You can get them online now, but so it was a fascinating kind of discussion that went on, but it was so important then that it was included. And I think if you go back to what happened in the Second World War, the Holocaust, and the abuse of the state taking over people's lives, there was so many discussions on, they need to prevent the ability for the state to take over education again, similar to what Hitler had done, and to protect parents from that. And so obviously that was very raw, and that came up quite a lot about the Holocaust. And the discussion kind of got a lot more serious after the compulsory element was included. So there's a really big debate about compulsion, and that only got voted in by, I think, 8 votes to 7, which I found fascinating. And a lot of people said, well, no, it shouldn't be compulsory. So after that was voted in, then quite a few of the members then said it's essential now that we need to get this clear, that if it's going to be compulsory, parents must have the right to choose. So they can't be forced into having an education that they don't want their children to have. They need to recognize that parents have primary responsibility for education. Full stop. It's parents that are in control. It's parents, after a baby's born, all to do those initial years, and it doesn't stop at 5 when the child goes to school. So parents have this key responsibility, and you can't undermine that. And they felt very, very strongly about that. I think it was particularly Charles Malik from the Lebanon. I think the US voted against it. The UK, I think, probably did. But Charles Malik from the Lebanon and a few other countries, the Netherlands, played a really important role in kind of pushing that through to make sure that we've got to highlight the importance of parents to limit state control, to make sure the state didn't take over education again and control it and use it for undesirable means. And so to me, it was very, very powerful. It was a really big lesson from history. I thought, yeah, it makes complete sense.
It's fascinating. And yeah, recently in the document Reimagining Education of UNESCO, one thing that is mentioned is that the provision of the right to education, no, the provision of education is not always the provision of the right to education, right? And there is also one thing that was included you mentioned in your document that what has happened in Germany was really relevant on the way the right to education was thought. And one sentence also that was included was that the main aim of the right to education is the full development of human personality, which is interesting because many times in the debates, what we heard is that the main aim is inclusion or other political, societal purposes, when the first aim of education is the person himself. Like, can you also share a little bit about that, what you found, and also the link of that with parental rights?
Yes. And so, yeah, that I didn't look into that, the details around the discussion around that, but it is kind of, if you think back, that was part of the protection they wanted. So the parental rights was part of the protection, and that the parents could choose their own. They didn't need to be forced to have what the state wanted, and also to try and get the state or all education to focus on the development of the individual, another kind of protection. And I suppose, which was kind of really forward thinking in those days, I think. So that shift away from focusing on societal goals and going to the individual instead. So to me, that was my only thoughts about that. That if you just had, because I remember when they drafted them, you had number 1 and number 2. So the second one came about the human personality, but then they still said that's not enough because the state could still dictate what that means. Yeah, so the state could define what human personality should be, and so if you just had paragraphs 1 and 2, that would not be sufficient to stop these abuses, and so you needed that paragraph C to really put it into black and white that it was parents who were responsible and should be in control.
This is a thing that today for some politicians sounds, and for some policymakers sounds like we're not to put parents, because it feels like as far as the state has democratic legitimacy, they could do even what they want. But at that point, well, and also thinking on the discussions, I'm thinking also Hannah Arendt at the time was thinking a lot about parents in the field of education, because he was thinking that totalitarianism could happen easily when human beings, and especially children, don't have any roots. Why do you think today, or what is your interpretation of what today is happening on certain people having some trouble of understanding the importance of parental rights?
Well, so I think not much has happened. The problem why the US and the UK voted against it, probably because they'd already set up their state systems of education. They'd already been introduced, which was free and compulsory by 1948, and so they're already locked in. And we know from history it is very, very difficult to change these state systems. And so not much has changed since 48. And with reference to the UK, we've got a similar kind of system. We try and introduce a bit of choice within the state system, and a few different types of schools are emerging now, because I think it's generally recognised this one size fits all is just not. Education is so complex, children are so different, they learn in different ways, they're more interested in different things. To have one size fits all, it's not going to work. But I remember Julian Huxley in the early 50s commenting on a paragraph C, and he said without paragraph C, then it's a bit like asking people in democracy to vote in a one-party system.
Indeed,
Isn't it?
indeed,
Yeah, and
that's a
that's what
nice
we've got
metaphor.
now. So we're asking parents to vote in a one-party, one kind of school system. And so it's very difficult to break out of that. It's very unpopular for politicians to kind of campaign on that. Parents are widely dispersed. They're not very good at campaigning together and putting pressure. And so it's very, very difficult to make change happen.
Yeah, and also I guess like when yeah, there is a problem of trusting citizens, no? I assume also that always has been there. Like we like to know what we well, we like to have control in our personal life, but also as
Yeah.
politicians. So seeing like, let's think like parents, which let's decide like parents know better. Sometimes it's a struggling for governors or for policymakers, even in democratic societies. James, I have a question. Like I have a question which is a contra argument of what we are talking here that you address in your text, and I would really like you to talk about that. It's sort of the elephant on the room. Yeah, this is rights of parents, but this is in the third part of the article. So in terms of hierarchy, shouldn't it be written in line like, okay, this is compulsory, the state has to do that, and if there is some room, and just if there is some room, let's acknowledge some rights to parents. Is there this is the order that's the order matter on the way of reading the article or
So,
not?
so I've read so many texts and see so many people in kind of authority referring to right to education and just referring to, paragraphs 1 or 2. And, it does drive me mad. And so there was definitely not written in order of importance.
Mm-hmm.
If you kind of put them all kind of along by the side of each other and they all interlink, if you think about the 3 different paragraphs, you think about 3 kind of circles overlapping, and somewhere all three circles overlap, then that would be the place you want to get to. And so, there could be an argument to say that you would have parental rights first. Parents have existed before states even existed. They've been there since the dawn of time. That is not going to change. The role and responsibility of parents in their children's upbringing. And so there's a good argument to say that should become, first if you're going to have some kind of priority. But they were definitely not written so that you could cherry pick.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they weren't supposed to cherry pick. Let's just introduce one. I've heard some people say, well, let's introduce the first 3 compulsory first, and then maybe down the line we'll get down to the others. But no, if you introduce one, then that undermines 3.
Mm-hmm.
If you introduce one by itself, then that automatically undermines paragraph 3. And so they've got to be done in conjunction. And that's been the failure, I think, that even when it was written, free and compulsory was already, state systems were already kind of set up in countries around the world. So it's been very difficult to shift that.
This is this it's fun to see somehow, like how people care about the hierarchy of the articles in certain articles, but not in other ones. One big concern that we are having is that the freedom to education and parental rights, we know from some of the research we've done, and also it's sort of obvious, that there is a link between the recognition of parents and the recognition of quality of democracy. Like we even have done some quantitative research, and we have seen that there is a link on that. And moreover, the only 2 states that we know for sure that they ban explicitly the possibility of parents to choose the education they want for their children are Cuba and North Korea, which are not exactly examples of democracies. But how do you perceive but nevertheless, like we keep hearing in the Western world, but I would say also elsewhere, that we have to think ways of reinforcing democracy, and the only way when talking about education is democratic education, global citizenship education. Why do you think we some politicians are struggling so much of trusting parents, especially in a world, as you were saying, children are different. There are more communities are becoming more plural. And also, what are your vibes on parental rights in the midterm in
Um,
Europe or in the
yeah,
world?
I mean, it's not a great, it's not, that I've not got an enormous amount of hope, because if you understand how the political systems work, then it's very difficult for politicians to argue that parental choice should be increased. And so that's a real difficult. It's not a vote winner, so it's very difficult to do. But what I can see is that parents are beginning to vote with their feet in other ways. So you see these things like private tuition, and now we've got the internet and everything else. It's, parents and families are beginning to, schools are becoming less and less important as far as learning is concerned, because they're going to other things now. They're going to other things they can get access to. So you can get access to so much on the internet now for children, learning material and tools. And so if we're not careful, we'll end up with kind of really dated and outdated education systems, which are still going, delivering the separate subjects that we did 100 years ago. We do a test just like we've always done. Whereas, everyone talks about these 21st century skills: collaboration, communication, creativity, critical thinking, these kind of 4 C's. But schools are not focused on that at all. In fact, a lot of that kind of emphasis has been pushed out so they can focus on these tests. And so, it's really kind of demoralizing sometimes to see that. But I think parents are going to look for other things outside of the schooling system, in holidays and at home and at weekends, different clubs, different kinds of experiences to kind of develop their children. So I think there's a real danger of, and that will penalise those without the good family background and without the parents who've not got the income or the support or don't know how to support their children. And so that's where they'll kind of lose out, I think.
James, I have one last question, and I'm thinking I'm all it looks like definitely like the world is in a struggling moment, but we also like to finish also with, as well, you were saying now one thing that you talk about hope, and like parents don't stop wanting the best for their children. So if they don't find it one way, they will find it another way. One thing I think we are seeking, or we need more when we talk about parental rights, is experience of victories, and also having some figures of people who have fight for that. I think James Malik on this regard has played an important role. Can you just to finish, share a bit about this figure? Like, I think it's not enough well known in the international community.
Yes, and his a kind of a selection of his speeches were published maybe 10 years ago by his son, and it's highly recommended. But yeah, he gave some really important. He played a critical role in the writing of Article 26 and a number of other articles, and because he was chair of certain committees at certain times, and just some of his speeches kind of really stick in the back of my mind, where he talks about people should be free to stand on the rooftops and shout that we are not servants to the state. We are individuals. We are people. We are families. That we are communities, and we shouldn't be consumed by the state and everything else. And so some really powerful speeches then, I think, which went against a lot of what was being spoken to in UNESCO at the time, I think, or within the United Nations in general. And so it was just really, I'd never come across him before, and it was just really a breath of fresh air, I think. And I'd recommend anyone to search him out and read some of his speeches, because they are kind of very inspirational.
James, thank you once again. I mean, I want to thank in the name of OIDEL about this lovely paper you sent to UNESCO, which is really helpful to understand the importance, the origins, and the genealogy of the Article 26.3. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and for all of us, for all the people who are following OIDEL, I just want to let you know that we are expecting to hear way more from James. So thank you so much. I don't know if you want to add anything, James, to end up with this conversation.
No, I mean, you did. There was one question that you didn't come on, which was the right of the child.
Oh, indeed.
Yes,
Let's
yes.
go. Let's go for it. Let's go for it.
Yes,
We have
which
time.
is a real, it's a bit of a tricky one,
Mhm.
because they didn't include that in 1948. I don't think they were that forward thinking. And so that does become an issue. And, the rights of the child do need to play a role to a certain extent. But again, the family can't just disappear. So if parents are primarily responsible for their children's care and education and learning up until the age of 16, maybe then, the rights of children will play a role because they've become a lot more, they have a lot more kind of voice and agency as they get older. And so it is really important to take their views into account, and that's the role of parents. But again, I find sometimes the focus on the rights of the child at the expense of the right of parents. So again, it's almost removing parents. But I think you can't airbrush parents out of this discussion.
Yeah,
they've all been there, and they're not going to go anywhere.
This is, thank you for bringing up this topic. And also what we are forgetting is like the rights of parents. I mean, we were saying each child is different. The state doesn't have the resources to give a one fit solution for everybody. And if we trust parents, it's because we gave them this responsibility, no? And responsibility always comes with rights and obligations. Yes. We always remember the obligations of parents, but we forget the rights. And it's indeed, like as a completely connected with children's rights. And important to remember that, because sometimes some scholars take advantage of this reality to just to remove parental rights, to say it right and clear. James, right. Thank you for bringing up this last topic. I think it was critical. My bad not to bring it up, but well, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, I look forward to speaking soon.
And we'll see you